your blade basically follows that angle that your toe is in relation to your opponent. Maybe not exactly, but you're in that same general angle. So when you raise your sword to come on guard, so if you raise your arm, say, where it's relatively parallel to the deck, where your elbow is in, right? Well, look at that. You're on guard. Bring your blade up so that your thrust and tip is generally oriented in your line of vision between you and your opponent, bisecting your body slightly from right to left. Does that make sense? So here I am. I'm on guard.
We got our own room.
Facing my opponent. Bang. It's a natural position. I'm on guard. Except that my arm is supporting the weight of my weapon. I don't really have any other stress on my body at this point. I'm in a comfortable position. I'm oriented towards my opponent. I'm on guard. And like I said, the only real stress on my body in this position is that I'm supporting the weight of my weapon. So like when you were on guard here, this is okay. And I know a lot of people fight like this, but you're susceptible to this corte attack, right? Especially if you're fighting someone like me. I'm a little taller than you. I have a little bit longer arms than you, and I probably have 3 inches of blade length on you, right? I can safely take this attack. So if you were to cut,
is it roll the shoulder back more, or
not just that, but while you're on guard, your blade was straight to me, right? So this area of your body is essentially unprotected. If I'm willing to roll the dice that I can strike this position faster than you can counter thrust, then, or plan for your counter thrust. When I hit here, you go to counterattack, and I roll my hand in to stop your shot. Right? So there's a timing issue. Maybe you're going to pin me, maybe you're not. But more likely, I'm going to strike my target before you can push back hard enough to pin my body. Maybe that sounds cheesy, right? I'm playing a timing game. I'm rolling the dice. But part of fencing is there's a risk management aspect involved in fencing. Can I execute my parry and riposte before my opponent can react? And what happens when he does react? Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure at some point that some of you are thinking, man, it's just going on and on about this shit that everybody knows. And you're right, we all know it. But every day out on the list, we see people who aren't doing it. So sometimes it's nice to have a reminder of these things you're supposed to be doing, or maybe kind of forgot about, because a lot of us, we see single as that speed bump. We get single, but we really want to fight dagger. We really want to fight case. But single sword is the core skill, and all of the other fighting styles revolve around it. If you have a solid understanding of fighting single rapier, adding the other weapons is just great. Right? It's just an extra toy, an extra advantage in defense and offense. So, really, the core of our sport is single rapier. Oops, stances, guard positions. Okay.
can we go back to
Absolutely.
where
I am here for you.
the blade position needs to be?
Okay.
Because obviously it doesn't need to be straight on line.
Right. I mean, you can fight like this, but understand that you're giving up some defense here, right?
Right.
So I always try to recommend bisecting your body slightly, right? So if I'm here, and if I'm on guard, right, Leo's going to attack me to the outside, right? This is a pretty small motion from here. My blade's still relatively oriented towards my opponent. Even if he were to totally advance towards me, his blade's offline. Now, obviously, someone who's super fast could hit that roller wrist in, but you're going to be ready for that, because while they're rolling the wrist in, you're going to jam them in the face. With the appropriate calibration.
Says the camera.
Right. Sorry, I know some of you folks don't know me. I'm actually the Kingdom Rapier Marshal for the Middle Kingdom. So I'm the biggest sucker in the house. It's a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun, and I've met some really great people. So, there were questions about grips and guards and body position, fighting stance. Great. So let's talk about parries. I was just watching before this class started. The Mid-Realm Rapier Champions tourney was going on, and it's interesting to me that, and I do it too, that a lot of rapier fighters, we do what we call, I call gunslinging, right? You're out there, you're on guard, and we're getting our scarves, cart, and our swords. If that happens, you should totally kill me. And we forego defense to a degree to bang blades back and forth, and we take shots, and we're really not guarding ourselves in the fact that we're continuing to attack. And the person who basically steps sideways first flinches or moves their hand slower than the other guy gets stabbed. Well, that's great and all, and it's become an aspect of our sport, but there are these things out there called parries. There's a bunch of them. They have funny names and numbers. In fact, I had to go make sure I had them all right when I wrote my notes for the class, so I wouldn't confuse the shit out of somebody. Sorry for my language. Some of the parries we're gonna throw right out the window. A lot of the traditional parries are intended to block cutting attacks, the over the head, the leg parries. Most of those parries were intended to stop cutting attacks. So I'm gonna not discuss them and talk about the four, what I think are primary parries, 4, 6, 7, and 8. And I know I'm going to get this wrong, so if somebody corrects me, I'm not going to feel upset about it. But basically it's 4, 6, 7, and 8. Is that right?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thanks.
You're good.
Okay, so, yeah. And regardless of what grip you're using, you just need to learn how your body works, right? And the perfect parry, when you execute, your blade will be generally oriented towards your opponent, right? That's the perfect thing. I mean, he's cool and all, but you're way prettier than he is. So, if Brigitte's going to attack me low and to the inside, right? So here's parry 8. And I've executed minimum amount of movement possible. My blade's still generally oriented towards my opponent, right? If she maintains her general position, which since she knows she just missed, she probably doesn't want to advance. She should be thinking, oh shit, I need to get out of here. I'm gonna gently extend my arm and try to take my killing shot. And her response should be to parry and probably get out of the way. So, or if she's going to the outside low, right? So I've got parry 7 again. I can extend high into the forte here. My one for the head out to the inside. Some of these parries are kind of awkward, right? But especially to do them, and they're hard for me, to be honest with you. Most of us are super susceptible to the high forte attack because we don't really think, unless we're super adept at using our hands. This area is the hardest to defend with the sword from your on guard position because you have to come from here to here to do something about it, right? I mean, you can avoid, here I think I can avoid here, but when I start talking about communication, I'm going to start talking about defending forte with the hand. For the single fighter, that makes the most sense to bring your hand into play. And when you see that high guard attack, right? My hand in play, my on guard. This is free money. Free money. Okay. But how often is it that we see the perfect pattern? Not very often, right? Because it's probably the one thing that we do that most SCA rapier fighters are most sloppy about is parries. Even myself. In fact, this is one of the reasons I wanted to teach this particular part of the class because I've sort of made part of my style reposting and reacting to bad blade positions or targeting or your opponent is moved, something like that. In traditional fencing, everybody's online. In the SCA fencing, your opponent can move, which is great. If I'm teaching this parry, well, this is great. If we're thinking in the traditional sense, we're still in line, I can attack. But if I do this parry and she sidesteps to my inside, right? I'm not in a position to attack from here, okay? In the traditional sense, right? I'd be parrying and riposte if she moves. I've missed, and now I'm open. My entire left side is vulnerable to attack, and I'm really not in a position to defend myself except for my hand. So, one of the things that I try to do, and I try to teach to my students, at least to the best that I can, is so when you get that parry, that bad parry in here, right, your blade's offline. Well, a lot of opponents will take this as their opportunity to, oh shit, their blade's offline, wham, I'm gonna come in for the kill. Well, that's cool and all, but, so, if we go real slow, she attacks in, my guard's offline, she goes to advance, right? This is just as fast an action as the traditional riposte. All I've done is rolled my wrist back towards my opponent to bring my blade online. Sure. Well, why don't you go to the outside so I can kind of do it the other way? Right, so I've taken my parry, but I've done a really sloppy parry, and my blade is oriented nowhere near my opponent. That's not really an issue. I still have control of her blade. I can just roll my wrist back in towards my opponent and attack. I still have control. Her blade is still offline. Free money attack. But you gotta practice. It takes a lot of work. I've been doing it for a long time. But it's another option, right? Because a lot of people, you'll see them and they're fighting and they take that parry and bam, they're offline, but they struggle to come back on guard. In that moment when they're transitioning from offline to back off guard, you're not a threat to your opponent. Anytime that your blade is not committing an action to defend or riposte, if you're in some transition, you're no longer a threat. And that moment that you're not a threat is when you get killed. As soon as your opponent goes, even some of you are new, and some of you who have been fighting for a while will understand, right? You'll get to that spot where you understand, you start to get the timing, the tempos of how the fights work. And you'll see their body movements, and you'll see that action, and you'll understand, it'll click. Their blade's offline. They're not a threat. Bang, and you'll flip your wrist and kill them. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
When you're watching, kind of your people they'll go in and make one exchange. If you're watching people who are very advanced fencers, they will go in, they will make an exchange, and the moment they will stay in there until they're a threat again. So if he's not a threat, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna keep in, I'm gonna stay in, I'm gonna keep parrying, I'm gonna keep attacking because he's not a threat. The moment he's a threat, I back out.
Right.
That's why they're furious.
Okay. Parries. And that idea will work from almost any of the parry positions. If you're coming in high, right, if you're going to take this outside, right? From here, my blade's offline. It's a little tougher for this position. That's pretty awkward. But I could flip my wrist back in. I almost never use this parry, which is a fault on my part. Something I'm actually doing. When I was writing the class, I went, you know, I should probably start doing that. It's really hard to cover your hand from this position. So, I mean, you can, some opponents, when they make that hard outside attack, you can catch that, but you're really rolling the dice, right? Your hand, there's a lot of hand-eye coordination involved in bringing your hand across your face to stop a sword shot, and most likely, if they have sufficient force, they're just going to pin your hand to your face. Which everybody will go, oh cool, you tried to catch it, but then I'm like, oh. Because for your arm muscles, right, this is not a strong position. So, sometimes for body shots, you can generate sufficient arm force to maybe stop a shot from touching you. I'm sure there's some argument, if you're playing with sharks, the shark blade would just travel through your hand and go through your body. But in the convention of the rules, right, if I can stop you from hitting me, I lose my hand and I get to keep fighting. So take away from the moment that we're not playing with sharps, we're playing with blunted edges, and I could in fact put my hand out and stop you from hitting me if I were strong. If I'm willing to sacrifice my hand, right? And this is a legit tactic, right? Brigid comes in, I put my hand on her point and kill her. Pretty cheesy, but in the convention of the rules, this is a legit, defend and attack. probably hurt like hell though. But, okay. Parries, rolling attacks. And really, once you get used to that idea, and it's really a mindset, I'm not off guard, you don't want to come back on the conventional guard. Try to roll your attack back in. That's great. I can do it pretty quick. I usually try to do it as soon as I see that I actually have contact. Right? So as soon as I've come across, right, while it's not really, you don't really have leverage there to use it as a pivot, mentally when I practice it, I use the contact as the blade as my mental note to make that pivot. So as they attack, I make my parry and then roll my shot. It's actually one action, not like a 1-2. I make contact and then roll my blade back. And it works just as fine as the outside. The upper attack, the upper ear attack is okay. This is actually better defended by your hand. Yes?
Just a quick question. When you're going to that,
it depends on what my opponent is doing. If I'm being advanced on, I might take a step back. Not necessarily because I'm worried about my guard, but I might take a step back to try to guard my calibration a little bit. Especially with an opponent, if he throws his tactic, he's advancing. There's an opportunity there where your elbow lock. At this point, your elbow is initially your elbow will lock, and if they run into you at this point, you have the potential to jam them. I might back up a little bit or change my footing slightly to keep it from doing that. If they're retreating, you could take a small step forward and advance into them. Most opponents, though, they're still in that, hey, I'm attacking you phrase, and you'll hit them before they can transition to parry and riposte. Did I answer your question?
yes.
Okay. Yes. No. So I'm not, so maybe, and this may be the wrong terminology, right? I'll call it the Colin MacNish gunslinger grip. So I'm standing here like this, right? So my finger's on the blade, and my thumb's resting. So I don't necessarily need to roll my wrist initially. If I'm just going to parry and not riposte, I don't necessarily need to roll my wrist, right? I can just move my blade over and take my shot. When I go to do the riposte, absolutely you're rolling your wrist. That's basically a fluid motion. You're just gonna let the blade come up, push in.
But you don't turn all the way.
So, so when you're taking that shot, so my blade is flat. When I do the rolling attack, my blade actually sort of comes into a traditional attack here where it's perpendicular to the deck, and I just push in. Because you're relying on your hands and your guard to maintain control of their blade. Even if you don't have them at your guard, even if you just have them here, when they push in, right, maintain that control. They have to disengage. Which can happen, but in the perfect case, you're going to do this move fast enough. They haven't had a chance to transition the muscles yet from the initial thrust. There's a lot of timing involved in this, which I know we all talk about time and tempo, but there really is, you kind of have to understand how the fight works, how your opponent moves. Parries, and what works about parries? I think that's a big no. Okay.
I'm pretty easy to identify. This covers it. I do have your pieces right here. I have no idea what the big deal is.
So let's move on to, also real quick, I owe everybody an apology. I intended to have notes for this. Because when they said, we want you to teach fundamental rapier, Single Rapier, I was like, yeah, I can see that. That's going to be easy stuff. And then I started writing, and I went, wow, I have a lot to say about this. And so if anybody would really like to have my class notes, which will probably make way more sense than my rambling while we were here, just get with me or send me a note or something. I'm easy to find. They're not on the disc. Must show up to or take. Okay. So let's talk, while we're at it, let's talk a little bit about footwork. I do not use a lot of footwork. I'm fat. I know we all hear the fat and old routine, but even when I was young and spry, I didn't do a lot of footwork. And footwork is something that you need to learn. There's a lot of comfort. You know, I like being in my guard, and I like duking it out. And I will sometimes retreat. I always have, and maybe this is just a mental thing on my part, I am always concerned when I'm advancing about my calibration. I'm always concerned about stepping in and ganking my opponent, especially if they're not really mindful of my measure to them, right? If they're stepping in slightly and I step in, bam. We see it all the time. You know, you miscalculate your opponent's measure and somebody gets ganked. In fact, I just saw it earlier. It just happens. Actually, not here. So, but it's worth noting. If you're going to advance, you must always be careful not to overextend your body. And it's awkward. And there's a couple of ways that you can do it. I always try to stay in my offensive guard. If that's the guard I'm taking, I try to stay in it. And I take a note from, you know, basically what they teach in modern fencing is you take that step and you advance while maintaining your relative stance, okay? And the same thing with retreating. You know, you can back up the same way. It's not intuitive from how we're taught to walk and move around. You have to teach yourself to do it. But the other way to do it is to transition from offensive to defensive as you advance, right? But it's slower, right? If I'm advancing here, I can probably do this real fast, but if I have to make the transition a second time, anytime you're in transition, your body's not, you know, if I'm thinking about where I'm going, I'm not always thinking about what my opponent's doing, where their blade is. I'll tell you what, if you have time, I'm going to move out to the open sparring area. And if anyone would like to continue